Did you know that behind the flashing lights, roaring applause and chart-topping anthems, many black music legends carried secrets that could have shattered everything they built? Beneath the fame and flawless stage personas were hidden battles, addictions that almost silenced their voices mid-performance, and inner demons that erupted into heartbreaking public downfalls. These are the 20 most jaw-dropping, untold truths that some of the greatest black musicians fought to keep in the shadows.
Marvin Gaye.
Marvin Gaye, his voice was velvet, his lyrics a balm for a broken world. He sang of love, healing and unity, yet behind the soulful melodies was a storm that raged within his own home. The mansion he bought for his parents, a symbol of gratitude and success, would become the unthinkable stage for a final act of tragedy, not at the hands of a stranger, but his own father. What could drive such darkness into the life of the Prince of Soul? It wasn't just the drugs, though his increasing dependence on cocaine fed paranoia and mood swings. It was something far deeper, a lifetime of pain rooted in a toxic, combative relationship with the man who raised him. Their home, once meant to be a refuge, had long since turned into a war zone. Friends whispered of brutal beatings, cutting insults, and a fear Marvin could never quite shake. He had spoken before, quietly, cautiously, about the terror he felt around his father, a preacher known more for his fists than his sermons. But no one imagined the horrors would culminate as they did on April 1, 1984. In a fit of rage, Marvin's father pulled the trigger, twice, killing the beloved singer just one day before his 45th birthday.
The world stood still.
The soul of Motown silenced by the very man who gave him life. As the trial unfolded, so did the dark truths Marvin had worked so hard to hide, a history of emotional torment and physical abuse that clashed violently with the tenderness of his songs. The family's buried secrets were finally exposed, but at the most devastating cost. And Marvin wasn't alone. Behind the glittering fame, many artists carry wounds they never fully reveal. Sometimes the deepest pain isn't broadcast to the world, it's buried within, slowly unraveling even the brightest stars.
Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson wasn't just a performer, he was a force of nature, a global icon whose life played out under a relentless spotlight. But behind the moonwalk, the glittering gloves and the Neverland fantasy, lived a man haunted by invisible pain. While the world obsessed over rumors and scandals, few knew the deeper truth. Michael was locked in a quiet war against excruciating physical agony and crippling insomnia. That war began, many believe, with a serious burn injury during a commercial shoot, an event that sparked his descent into painkillers. The countless cosmetic procedures only made things worse, layering on discomfort that never seemed to fade. As the pressure to remain superhuman grew, so did his need for stronger sedation. Eventually, even sleep became elusive, and he turned to extreme measures, relying on powerful hospital-grade anesthetics just to rest. Terrified that the truth would destroy his legacy, Michael wore a mask of strength, hiding his suffering from even those closest to him. But as he prepared for a monumental comeback, his body gave out. The world was stunned when news broke. The king of pop was gone, taken by a fatal overdose. In that moment, the curtain was pulled back, revealing a man surrounded by enablers, crushed by expectations, and silenced by a pain he never dared to show.
On stage, he was immortal.
Off stage, he was human, fragile, exhausted, and misunderstood until the very end.
Kelly.
Kelly built his empire on charm, talent, and a string of chart-topping hits that made him an icon of R&B. To the world, he was the smooth-talking hitmaker with a golden voice. But behind the music and the fame lurked a deeply disturbing secret. For decades, he allegedly led a double life, one marked by manipulation, control, and the exploitation of young, vulnerable individuals. Whispers of misconduct followed him for years, but the full scope of his alleged actions remained buried beneath a wall of silence, loyal supporters, and powerful enablers. The first chilling crack in his carefully curated image came with a secret marriage to an underage singing prodigy, an explosive scandal that was swiftly swept under the rug. Even after facing trial and walking free, the rumors never stopped. Allegations grew more alarming, describing a hidden world where Kelly allegedly isolated victims, dictated their every move, and subjected them to psychological torment. His influence, fame, and threats kept many silent, until a groundbreaking docuseries shattered that silence. The series gave voice to the voiceless, and the haunting testimonies revealed a pattern of abuse spanning decades. The truth, long concealed, could no longer be ignored. What followed was a wave of public reckoning, fresh investigations, and ultimately, a conviction on federal charges including racketeering and exploitation. The world saw the unmasking of a star once adored, now disgraced. Behind the fame and the music was a man whose dark secrets destroyed lives, forever staining the legacy of one of America's most celebrated voices.
Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston.
A voice like no other, pure, powerful, and unforgettable. She wasn't just a singer, She was the voice, America's sweetheart with an angelic image, a radiant smile, and a stage presence that could move millions. But behind the spotlight and soaring vocals was a heartbreaking secret. For years, Whitney was quietly fighting a devastating battle with addiction, one she kept hidden to protect the image the world adored. Rumors swirled, but her team denied them. Many pointed fingers at her tumultuous marriage, blaming her husband as the source of her decline. And while their relationship was undeniably toxic, the truth ran deeper. Whitney's struggles with substance use began long before, rooted in pain and pressure few could see. She became a master of illusion, graceful and composed in public, but privately unraveling. Those closest to her spoke of a woman trying desperately to hold on to her voice, her legacy, her peace. But addiction slowly took its toll, not just on her body, but on her gift. Public appearances turned erratic. Performances once flawless became unpredictable. Still, she fought to regain control, entering rehab multiple times, hoping for a way out. But on February 11, 2012, the curtain fell. Whitney was found unresponsive in a hotel bathtub, her death ruled as drowning with heart disease and drug use as contributing factors.
The world was stunned.
The angelic voice that once soared above all others had been silenced, not by scandal, but by a long and lonely battle too heavy to carry. And in that tragic ending, the truth finally emerged. Even the brightest stars can burn out when the pain becomes too much to bear.
James Brown.
James Brown wasn't just a performer, he was a force of nature. Nicknamed Mr. Dynamite, and crowned the godfather of soul, he revolutionized popular music with unmatched energy and innovation. On stage, he was a symbol of black pride, resilience, and brilliance. But behind the flashing lights and roaring crowds was a much darker reality few dared to speak of. Privately, James Brown ruled his world with an iron fist. Many who knew him intimately described a man both feared and revered. His personal life was riddled with chaos. Multiple women, including long-term partners and wives, accused him of abuse and control. One of his marriages, in particular, was marred by explosive confrontations, with law enforcement called to their home on numerous occasions. And yet, his fame seemed to act as a shield, deflecting real consequences. Within his inner circle, Brown was infamous for his harsh treatment of band members, doling out fines for minor mistakes and cultivating an atmosphere of anxiety and obedience. Those close to him said his escalating paranoia, fueled in part by substance abuse, made him unpredictable and dangerous. While the tabloids occasionally caught wind of his run-ins with the law or erratic behavior, the deeper, more disturbing truth often stayed hidden in the shadows. It wasn't until after his death in 2006 that more voices began to speak out, revealing the painful duality of the man behind the mic. James Brown, the hardest working man in show business, was not just a music legend, but for many, the architect of a silent terror that existed behind the curtain of fame.
Ray Charles.
Ray Charles was blind by the age of 7, but his musical vision saw farther than most ever could. A true genius, he fused gospel, jazz, blues, and country to create the unmistakable sound of soul. On stage, he radiated brilliance and resilience, a man of deep passion and unmatched talent. But behind the sunglasses and the legendary voice, Ray carried a heavy, hidden burden. For nearly 2 decades, at the height of his fame, he fought a powerful addiction that threatened to unravel everything he had built. Behind closed doors, Ray struggled with a potent drug dependency that began in his late teens and shadowed him well into the 1960s. At the same time, his personal life was far from the picture-perfect family man image seen by the public. He had numerous affairs and fathered several children with different women. Truths kept carefully out of the spotlight. Maintaining his habit while touring was a secret operation in itself. Every performance was followed by a private battle, covert arrangements, hidden usage, and the constant fear of being exposed. Legal troubles eventually caught up with him, and after multiple arrests, Ray made the life-changing decision to confront his addiction. He withdrew from the stage, sought treatment, and returned not just clean, but stronger. While some stars fought addiction, others clashed with the law. And for one legendary songstress, her deepest struggles were not just ignored. They were weaponized by the very system that should have protected her.
Billie Holiday.
Billie Holiday's voice could break your heart and put it back together in the same breath, haunting, soulful, and unlike anything the world had heard. But behind that unforgettable sound was a woman locked in a lifelong battle. Prejudice, pain, and a powerful addiction to heroin formed the shadows of her story. Shadows that law enforcement turned into weapons. Her struggles weren't hidden in jazz circles. Lady Day, as she was known, tried to keep her addiction private, to protect what was left of her dignity. But one federal agent reportedly made it his personal mission to destroy her, targeting her with an obsessive cruelty that went beyond the law. In 1947, she was arrested and sentenced to prison. When she got out, her cabaret license was stripped, meaning she couldn't legally perform in most New York clubs. For a singer, that was like cutting off her lifeline. She tried again and again to break free from her addiction, but the weight of past trauma, the loss of work, and the relentless pursuit by authorities made recovery nearly impossible. Even as she lay dying in a hospital bed in 1959, frail, alone, her body failing, she was placed under police guard for alleged possession. No mercy, not even in her final days. Billie Holiday's life was a masterpiece of music, and a tragedy of injustice. Hers wasn't just a fall from grace. It was a systematic breakdown fueled by racism, addiction, and power abused. Some stars fade quietly. Others leave behind echoes too powerful to ignore. And Lady Day's story still sings, a mournful tune of beauty, pain, and the cruelty that tried to silence it. Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke. The golden-voiced king of soul. A man whose smooth vocals and magnetic charm lifted him from gospel stages to the top of the pop charts. With movie star looks, undeniable talent, and a sharp business mind, he crafted a public image that was polished, clean, and untouchable. But behind the fame, behind the hit records and adoring fans, there was a story waiting to explode. His sudden, violent death in a seedy motel at just 33 years old shattered the illusion. The official report claimed he was shot by the motel manager in self-defense after a supposed rampage involving a woman with a criminal past. But to those who knew him, and to millions who admired him, the narrative didn't sit right. How could this calm, composed icon turn into the man described in police reports? The truth of what happened that night remains clouded in mystery. Whispers of a setup, involvement with organized crime, and even motives tied to his civil rights activism still echo decades later. Cooke was known to carry large sums of cash, and many believed the investigation was rushed, even manipulated. Was it a crime of passion, a robbery gone wrong, or something far darker? Whatever happened that night, one thing is certain: the final chapter of Sam Cooke's life remains one of music's most haunting and unresolved tragedies. And while his end was wrapped in secrets, some of the industry's biggest scandals come not from how a story ends, but from the truth about how it begins. Milli Vanilli. Milli Vanilli burst onto the global music scene like a firework, infectious beats, flawless dance moves, and undeniable charisma. With their striking looks and energetic performances, they skyrocketed to fame, even clinching a Grammy for Best New Artist. But behind the spotlight was one of the boldest deceptions in music history. The duo never sang a single note on their hit records. It was all a carefully orchestrated illusion, masterminded by a European producer who believed real talent wasn't marketable enough. So he hired gifted but overlooked vocalists to record the songs and cast two handsome, struggling dancers as the face of the group. Trapped in a gilded prison of fame built on lies, the pair lip-synced their way across sold-out stadiums while the real voices stayed hidden in the shadows. The facade began to crumble during a live televised performance when the backing track glitched, skipping and repeating, exposing the truth in front of millions. Whispers turned into outrage, and soon after, the producer came clean. The fallout was swift and unforgiving. Their Grammy was stripped, lawsuits piled up, and the duo became global outcasts. What was once a dream turned into a haunting nightmare, one that would eventually lead to the heartbreaking downfall and tragic death of one of Milli Vanilli's own.
Lauryn Hill.
Lauryn Hill, the voice of a generation, rose like a comet. Her debut solo album wasn't just a success, it was a cultural earthquake, earning critical acclaim, sweeping awards, and redefining what it meant to be a conscious artist in mainstream music. With her soulful depth and fearless truth-telling, she became a beacon of authenticity. But just as quickly as she ascended, she vanished, retreating into a silence that puzzled fans and insiders alike. Behind the curtain, Lauryn's story grew darker and more complicated. Her career unraveled in whispers of erratic behavior, long creative droughts, and serious legal troubles. Most notably her failure to pay federal taxes on millions of dollars in income. But her disappearance wasn't just about legal woes. Lauryn became deeply disenchanted with fame and the music industry, which she viewed as a toxic machine exploiting black talent. She spoke of wanting to escape the matrix, to free herself from a world driven by greed, manipulation, and systemic racism. She chose instead a life away from the limelight, raising her children in private, pursuing spiritual growth, and distancing herself from what she called a hostile pop culture climate filled with false entitlement, prejudice, and ageism. Her rare performances became unpredictable, sometimes brilliant, sometimes baffling. And when she was sentenced to prison for tax evasion, it felt like a public unmasking, a tragic symbol of a gifted soul clashing with the world's rigid systems. Lauryn Hill didn't just step back, she broke away. But when a star's inner battle becomes part of the public spectacle, the world often forgets the person behind the legend.
Kanye West.
Kanye West, a name that echoes through music history as both a revolutionary artist and a lightning rod for controversy. As a producer and rapper, his genius reshaped the sound of a generation, constantly redefining what hip-hop could be. But behind the innovation and the accolades lies a far more complicated truth. In recent years, his public meltdowns and headline-making statements drew more attention than his music, sparking debate and judgment. For years, the root of these erratic moments remained a mystery, until it was revealed that Kanye had been silently battling a serious mental health condition. It was a diagnosis he sometimes embraced, other times denied, leaving fans and loved ones unsure of where the truth ended and the pain began. His then-wife eventually broke her silence, pleading for understanding while also acknowledging the chaos and heartbreak it brought into their lives. The real secret wasn't just the label of a disorder, it was the crushing weight of living with it under the unforgiving glare of global fame and his own conflicted journey with treatment. Some wars are invisible, waged within the mind. And in Kanye's case, the struggle wasn't just about survival, it was about being seen, heard, and understood before it was too late.
Prince.
Prince was more than a musician. He was a mystique, a genre-defying genius who built an entire universe out of funk, rock, R&B, and pop. He was famously private, fiercely independent, and projected an image of purity and discipline, rarely seen without his signature flair and unshakable confidence. So when news of his sudden death broke, the world was stunned, not just by the loss, but by the heartbreaking truth that followed. Behind the dazzling lights and electrifying performances was a man silently battling chronic pain. Years of high-energy shows and physically demanding routines had taken their toll. To push through the agony and maintain the powerhouse performances fans adored, Prince turned to powerful painkillers. But this wasn't common knowledge. Only a tiny circle knew the depths of his struggle.
He hid it well.
Always composed, always in control, until the very end. His death was ruled an accidental overdose of a dangerously potent synthetic opioid, concealed in counterfeit pills. The world mourned, but the deeper tragedy lay in the revelation. Even someone as seemingly invincible as Prince could be undone by hidden pain and the silent desperation to keep going. Prince, who mastered every note, every look, every moment of his legacy, was ultimately undone by the one thing he couldn't control: suffering in silence. Some secrets destroy from within. And in the world of music, not all hidden truths involve self-destruction. Some cross a darker line, like the next icon whose secret would shatter the trust of others.
Chuck Berry.
Chuck Berry was rock and roll royalty, an electrifying guitarist, a groundbreaking songwriter, and a showman whose duck walk and riffs helped define a generation. But behind the swagger and stage lights, there lurked a deeply unsettling truth. While many knew of his early conviction for transporting a minor across state lines, few were prepared for what came next. Years later, a bombshell dropped. Several women accused Berry of secretly filming them in the restroom of his own restaurant. Authorities discovered hidden cameras and disturbing footage during a search of his property. Though he avoided jail through a plea deal and quietly settled the lawsuits, the damage to his legacy was irreversible. This voyeurism scandal exposed a dark, disturbing side to a man once idolized by millions. A shocking betrayal that clashed violently with his public image. But if Chuck Berry's secret was rooted in exploitation, another rock pioneer's hidden battle would be one of identity, faith, and internal war. Little Richard. Little Richard, the glittering pioneer torn by inner shadows. He wasn't just a rock and roll legend, he was the spark that lit the fire. With his electrifying presence, outrageous outfits, and boundary-pushing lyrics, Little Richard didn't just break the mold, he blew it to pieces. His public image was loud, proud, and unapologetically androgynous, challenging the norms of an era that wasn't ready for someone like him. But behind the glitter and glory was a man locked in a painful battle between identity and faith. Throughout his life, Little Richard wrestled with who he was and what he believed. A devout Christian, he walked away from music more than once, tormented by the belief that his desires clashed with his religion. In some interviews, he candidly spoke of his personal experiences and sexuality. In others, especially in his later years, he condemned those very parts of himself as sinful. The contradiction left fans and friends puzzled, but for Richard, it was a reflection of a deeper war within his soul. His life was a dazzling performance under the spotlight, but in the shadows, it was a storm of longing and guilt. And while he shaped the sound of a generation, his internal struggle never truly found peace. But he wasn't alone. For another funk innovator, the war wasn't with faith, it was with addiction, and it nearly erased him from the world he once ruled.
Sly Stone.
Sly Stone was more than a funk pioneer. He was a revolutionary force who shattered racial and musical boundaries, leading a trailblazing, multiracial, mixed-gender band that embodied unity and joy. At the height of his fame, he was a symbol of possibility, a visionary who brought people together with electrifying anthems. But behind the glittering stage lights, a much darker story was unfolding. As the years passed, Sly spiraled into heavy drug use, relying on powerful stimulants and dissociatives that slowly dismantled everything he'd built: his career, his fortune, and his peace of mind. The magnetic frontman who once commanded the stage with brilliance became a ghost of himself, missing shows, slurring through performances, and sinking deeper into paranoia. His vibrant sound grew disjointed and haunted, mirroring the chaos inside him. The world watched as he slipped into near-total isolation. For decades, Sly Stone became a myth, a genius lost to time. Whispers of his whereabouts filled the void, until a heartbreaking truth emerged. The man whose music had generated millions was living out of a van, virtually homeless and forgotten by the very industry he helped revolutionize. It was a tragic and quiet collapse, the price of a long battle fought in silence. Though he attempted comebacks, the brilliance of Sly Stone was largely drowned out by the weight of addiction. Losing oneself to drugs is a tragedy in its own right, but for one rising rap legend, the most devastating secret wasn't addiction. It was an illness that struck him down just as his star began to rise.
Eazy-E.
Eazy-E was more than just a pioneer of gangster rap. He was its godfather, the gritty voice of the streets, and the mastermind behind NWA and Ruthless Records. With his unmistakable tone and larger-than-life persona, he helped define a generation of rebellious sound and raw truth. That's why his sudden death in 1995 sent shockwaves through the music world. What many didn't know was that behind the scenes, Eazy was silently battling a deadly enemy: AIDS. What began as a routine hospital visit for a lingering cough quickly turned into a nightmare. Doctors diagnosed him with the advanced stages of the disease, and within weeks, the icon was gone. The speed was staggering, so fast that even his closest allies barely had time to react. In one of his final public statements, Eazy-E addressed his diagnosis and past lifestyle, offering a raw, heartfelt warning to others: learn from my story. His passing wasn't just a loss to music, it was a reminder that illness can strike in silence, hiding in the shadows until it's too late. And while Eazy's battle was with a virus, for another funk legend, the fight was against a different demon: addiction, a force just as destructive and just as tragic.
Rick James.
Rick James, the self-proclaimed king of punk-funk, wasn't just a musical force, he was a walking spectacle. With a string of chart-topping hits, wild stage presence, and an unapologetically rebellious attitude, Rick embodied the essence of excess. But behind the glitter, glamour, and outrageous charm hid a far darker reality, one far more disturbing than his notorious bad boy persona let on. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, his growing addiction to powerful stimulants began to spiral out of control, unleashing a torrent of violent, erratic behavior that shocked even his most loyal fans. The most horrifying revelations came when he and his girlfriend were arrested for holding a young woman captive in his home for several days, subjecting her to terrifying abuse, including being burned with scalding paraphernalia. And just as the world was reeling from those accusations, another disturbing incident surfaced, this time involving a second woman and a violent confrontation allegedly triggered by missing drugs. What was once dismissed as rockstar recklessness was now exposed as something far more sinister. But the true shockwave hadn't even hit yet. Beneath the surface of this unraveling icon's life lay an even more horrifying secret, one buried within a famous musical duo that would eventually explode into the public eye and forever stain the legacy of funk royalty.
Ike Turner.
Ike Turner was a trailblazer, a groundbreaking guitarist and bandleader credited with helping birth rock and roll. As the driving force behind a world-renowned revue, he basked in international fame. But behind the curtain of those electric performances, a disturbing truth festered in silence. While the world saw a dynamic duo lighting up the stage, his famous singing partner was living a nightmare. He didn't just share the spotlight, he tried to control it. With a cold iron grip, he dictated every part of her life and career. The powerhouse voice that mesmerized millions was often silenced behind closed doors by brutal physical abuse, emotional torment, and manipulation. She wore bruises beneath the sequins, forced to perform through pain, fear, and exhaustion. For years, the truth stayed hidden, locked behind a wall of shame and control, until she found the courage to speak out. Her confession shattered the illusion, exposing the darkness that fame had disguised. But while her painful story came to light, the tragic and unresolved deaths of two rap legends remain buried in mystery, surrounded by secrets, speculation, and the echoes of lives stolen too soon.
Solomon Burke.
Solomon Burke, the king of rock and soul, and so much more. With a voice that could shake the heavens and a presence that commanded every stage he touched, Solomon Burke was a towering force in music. His influence shaped generations of artists, earning him the crown as the king of rock and soul. But behind the powerful vocals and magnetic performances was a life far richer and more mysterious than most fans ever knew. Beyond the spotlight, Burke lived a dual existence. He wasn't just a music legend, he was an ordained bishop and a spiritual leader who quietly tended to his church community. He didn't just sing about salvation, he preached it from the pulpit, conducted weddings and funerals, and led his congregation with the same passion he brought to the stage. And if that weren't surprising enough, Burke also ran a funeral home business. A licensed mortician since his teenage years, he was hands-on and deeply involved, treating his work with reverence and care. It wasn't just a side job, it was a calling, one that coexisted with his music and ministry in a life full of contradictions and commitment. Even his personal life held secrets, rumors of a sprawling family and a private dynasty rarely seen by the public eye. He balanced the sacred and the secular, the showbiz glitz and the quiet dignity of death care, all while keeping much of it carefully hidden behind the curtain. These lesser-known truths about Solomon Burke offer a glimpse into the complex layers behind the legend. Because for every black music icon, there are often stories the world never sees, burdens carried in silence, lives lived in compartments, and secrets tucked just out of reach of the stage lights. Their art endures, but understanding the hidden worlds they move through adds a deeper, more human, and often more heartbreaking, dimension to their legacy. And that's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button, leave a comment, and share it with others. It really helps keep me motivated to create more content like this. Thanks so much for watching.